This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruitment podcast. And one of the most pleasurable parts of me being host on this channel is when I get to invite people that I really know really well to introduce to you our community. And this person is of no exception, actually, and I can't wait for you all to get to know him better. This is Ben James, and he's the co-founder and managing director of Simpson Judge. And dare I say it, he's actually my unofficial legal counsel as well, which I know we're going to come on to today. So welcome to you today, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thank you. Very good.
It's really nice for you to join us. So there'll be plenty of people, because we've got a global audience, who'll be clicking away on your profile on LinkedIn and Simpson Judge as well. Tell us a little bit about the business and how you've evolved since you set up.
Okay, so the business at the moment, we're predominantly an accountancy and finance, legal and IT recruiter. We've got a couple of other bits on that. So we do PA recruitment, which most of it spins off the back of the finance stuff that we do. So we do PA and EA recruitment. We've also got a division that does consumer recruitment, which was somebody you placed with us, which is also doing really well. So that's just a slightly different thing that sits on the side of the rest of what we do. As it stands at the moment, we're around about 50 heads, and of those, 44 of them are billing heads, split across 2 offices. So we have 30, you're testing me on numbers now. I think we've got 34 in Preston and 16 in Manchester.
Wow.
Across those 2 offices. In terms of background, so we're coming up to 11 years old, 10 and a half years old. Rob and I have known each other. Rob Simpson's co-founder. We've known each other 18 and a bit years. So we were on the same training intake at Hayes. We did 2 years. We actually, I was thinking about this the other day, we very nearly set up a business 16 years ago. And we both decided that we probably didn't have enough experience at that point. And I think we were right.
Do you think so? Oh, we'll definitely come back to that, I think, because I didn't know that. There you go.
Yeah. So we were sat in the Blackburn office at Hayes, and we were the only 2 people in there, and we both had got to the point where we thought, don't think this is long term. We've never been particularly big corporate boys. And we
I can vouch for that, everybody.
And we thought about setting it up at that point, and in the end, it didn't pan out. Rob went to Australia. I moved to another accountancy and finance recruiter, and the way it kind of came about, the business setting up, is Rob moved back, worked for a couple of businesses in the UK, didn't particularly enjoy working for those businesses, and he set Simpson Judge up, which is why it's called Simpson Judge and not Simpson James. And he rang me for some advice in terms of the market within the Northwest, because he'd been in Australia for, I think, 5.5, 6 years. And straight away, I sort of was at the same point as him. I wasn't overly happy, wanted to set up on my own. And we met at the Tickle Trout for a beer about 2 days
anyone
later.
that's ever been, stick a thumbs up. It's a brilliant meeting place. I've done many meetings there over the year. Years.
We had a couple of beers, and half an hour later decided, right, let's just do it together, and that's when I came in, which was, I mean, I think at that point we hadn't done there was no business done yet. It was just it was very, very early stages.
So is this 2012? About 2012?
2013, yeah.
2013, right?
2013.
Gosh. Wowzers.
So we were 10 years the business set up 10 years ago in February. I think I joined in the May.
Right.
So yeah, very, very early doors on. And then from there, in terms of sort of how we've evolved, first year was just me and Rob. We were trying to build enough sort of cash in the bank to start hiring staff, as well as fighting like hell to both pay our mortgages and everything else, which is never easy to start with, because I think the perception of what startups are like and what it's actually like is very different.
You have to do everything.
Yeah, and also the fact, managing the cash is very difficult as well, because we didn't go in with a big chunk of cash. We went with one of those backer companies, as you know, but they didn't put any cash in. They sort of set the website up for you. They do all of those bits, and they do the back office for you, but they don't actually give you any money. So what you don't realise is, from even if you do a placement week 1, you're probably not going to get the cash on that until week 3. Sorry, until month 3. Until month 3. So. Getting through that bit, and particularly there being 2 of us, and Rob having 2 quite young kids at the time, was a massive challenge. But we got through that, and first year went pretty well, apart from some of the legal stuff, which we're coming on to in a bit, I think. But first year went really well. We started taking staff on from year 2. And I suppose that the story of Simpson Judge is sort of two parts, really. So you've got kind of a pre-COVID Simpson Judge, and you've got a post-COVID Simpson. So pre-COVID, our mantra was very much take on experienced heads, give them a lot of flexibility in terms of what they can do. We weren't hugely sort of KPI driven or performance driven in terms of what we did. And the attitude was, we'll take these experienced heads on, they'll do really well. And that worked fine for us. I mean, we grew, I think on average, we grew 40-ish% a year. So we went into COVID with 17 people. We came out of COVID with 13. We actually didn't let anyone go. There were 4 people who decided, most of them decided that they didn't want to do 360 recruitment anymore, because I think the perception at that point was it's probably going to be a real drag out of COVID, which in the end it absolutely wasn't.
It wasn't.
So we came out with 13. We then changed our sort of strategy, if you will, in terms of how we were going to grow heads. And we put a training academy in place with, we got some advice from a few people externally who were absolutely brilliant and even made introductions to training people and that bit. And we came out with a very different strategy in terms of the way to go if we want to grow quick is going to be go down the graduate and trainee route. And it's not, they're not all graduates. We take a lot of people on that are from sales backgrounds or non-graduate backgrounds. It's about a 50-50 split actually. And since then we've gone from 13 heads to 50 heads in 2 and a bit years. So we're about.
What I just want to, before we go further, because I love that you've given us that evolution, and that's one of the main reasons I want to get you on the show, because there's so many sort of facets to your story that I think is really compelling to our listeners there's a lot of leaders listening, and there's a lot of wannabe leaders listening. So I think they'll be scribbling away. Why did you decide to change from what I've partnered you since 2015, and so there were 3, 4 of you in Preston. And I've
that's horrible office in Preston.
Oh, it was all right. The furniture was a bit dodgy, but it was all right. And we went for some dodgy pub for lunch. But anyway, never forgotten that. But why? What shifted in you and Rob as leaders to decide to go from? And I don't want to say it wasn't a lifestyle business. It really wasn't. But you were this kind of.
It was never set up to be a lifestyle business. It was always set up to grow it, and we were clear on that.
Right. But, okay.
So I think we had a lot of time to think in COVID, because there was certainly the first 3 months in COVID. Yeah. You were kind of thinking about whether we were going to survive or not. That was one big bit. I mean, I don't want to go through the COVID bit because everyone went through the same thing, absolutely. Yeah. But and then we thought a lot about it, and strangely, we started listening to there was a lot of podcasts that popped up during COVID. So there's obviously yours. There's a few other recruitment podcasts.
Some brilliant podcasts out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were a few people that were really interested on those podcasts that we thought, actually, we like what you're doing and how you've done things. And Rob, more specifically than me, actually reached out to a couple of them on LinkedIn and just said, it'd be great if we could just pick your brains for half an hour on how you've done it, how you've managed to do that growth. So we spoke to one person that, I won't go into detail on who it was, but he then put us in touch with a lot of other advisors and people externally and training people and those types of things. And we came to the conclusion that we'd spoken to 3 or 4 of them, and all of them had exactly the same answer, which is if you want to grow consistently, control your growth, the only possible way you can do that is by bringing your own people and training them. Because if you only hire experienced, it's very difficult to control that intake, because the experience come along when the experience come along. And as you know, we partner with multiple Rec-to-Recs, and you guys, it is very much a case of when those candidates come along and those candidates being the right fit for us. So that's what we decided to do. And coming out of COVID, I spent 3-4 months building with our external L&D guy. We spent 3 or 4 months building what the training program would look like before we started hiring. Excellent. And then we went out and started hiring. So we now run in-house graduate academies where people have training sessions internally with me and our management team. And then once they've got through their first 6-8 weeks in the business, they then go on external training with our external training guy. And that's where the business has changed. So we can directly control the growth. I mean, there's still massive learns around doing that as well, because to start with, you get headcount obsessed and you just hire everyone.
Well, I think everybody did in 2022, to be fair. But I just to pause, just to sort of focus in on a couple of points that I really want to, I guess, embellish for you, to say that as an experienced Retrec, as one of your partners, you are in a candidate-driven market, reliant upon the right people being at the right time. And in terms of scaling your growth, it's still important to have those solid relationships in place. But I totally agree with you. And if I think back to not just the evolution of Simpson Judge, but generally as a recruitment industry, the businesses that have scaled have had training academies. It's as simple as that. But
so we do a mix. To back up what you're saying, we do a mix, and as and when experienced people come along, we will bring them in and we'll slot them into the business. I mean, there are some businesses. I was listening to a podcast the other day. There are some that literally will not take anyone experienced.
I know.
That's not us. We take experienced hires. I think there's 4 or 5 have come in recently because the market seems to be shifting a little bit back towards people moving around. But the problem with that is you can't control that growth.
You can't. But like you say, it's the balance of both, because there's a benefit and an advantage to always bringing in experienced people. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't have a job. But what I've always felt is a very attractive proposition to experienced people, where there is that culture of a training academy, is that they can see that there's going to be continual growth, and it's also good for those who are looking at succession planning. It is as simple as that. But I do just want to reinforce the point you've made, which is that before you started hiring those people, you set the learning and development strategy in place. You put those things in place. And I think where I've seen it maybe not work as well, where I've maybe been on the receiving end of a trainee that's just been brought on, possibly because they're cheap hire, I don't know, and they've not had any formal training, that's where it goes wrong. So I think that your advice is set your stall out.
Yeah, we've hired a lot of those in the last 12 months. We've hired a lot of people that were taken on during 2021, 2022, and even earlier this year, and sort of, for want of a better expression, were chewed up and spat out by the businesses they went into. So literally, there's a desk, there's a phone, get on with it. We're not going to give you any background. And what we did is brought them in. And the great thing with all of them is they were, I want to learn, I want to be trained. And we've put them all back through our rookie training, even though they've got experience.
Love it.
And most of those are absolutely flying along now. They're doing really, really well.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's good. So there's definitely hope, because we do a lot. I mean, it's very hard to know exactly who our listeners are, but the ones that write into me, which I love, tend to either be leaders or those who have just set up on their own, or it tends to be new biz people that have just joined the industry that have got a vicarious appetite to learn. So for you, the one listening now, there is hope, and there are companies out there. So I love how you've created that sort of evolutionary story. I think it's really compelling. And I think you've clearly set your stall out now as to succession planning for the people and it's retaining the good talent. But I do want to pick up on something that we alluded to in the introduction, which was when you obviously looked to set up on your own. There are lots of people listening to this show that are thinking about or in the process of setting up on their own. And one of the key questions I get asked is, where do I stand on my restrictive covenants? So from a legal perspective, I want to break your answer into 2: advice for those who are the leaders, the employers, how you can protect your business, and then advice for those who are listening who are thinking of doing it for themselves, so for the actual recruiters themselves.
The first, I'll do we'll do it in that order, because the second bit's a really interesting question on setting up on your own. I think there's some really big questions you need to ask yourself, as well as covenants, if you're going to set up on your own. Which we've learned a lot from a restricted covenants perspective. Now, look, I'm not a solicitor, but we've spent a lot of time in this, and I think when we set up, it probably got as far as it can get without actually going to trial, because we made some mistakes, and also the employer that I had previously was probably right in what they were doing, looking back at it. But took things to a big extreme because they couldn't necessarily find any actual contractual breaches. As an employer, the first thing I would say, and I was thinking about this and writing some notes on this morning, is make sure that your contract is as good as it can possibly be and is doing what you want it to do. And the reason I say that is because just because something is in your contract doesn't mean it's enforceable. Okay, so you could say, right, you can't work for anybody within 20 miles of here. You can't do any business in, for example, accountancy and finance recruitment for the next 12 months. And you can't speak to anybody that's on our database. Right? You can have all of those covenants in your contract. That doesn't mean they're enforceable.
No.
And the first thing that will happen when a solicitor gets hold of those from the other side is they'll tear those apart and they'll start striking them out, which is when we eventually got some really good legal advice. My solicitor sort of went through the contract and said, well, they can't do that, they can't do that, they can't do that, they can't do that. Make them realistic. And what they have to be, I think the expression my solicitor used was, they have to be the minimum level of protection to adequately protect your business. So effectively what you're doing is you're stopping someone from walking out the door, setting up, taking all your clients and all your staff with them.
Yep.
That's all you can do. And you can only do that for a period of time, which I think I'm right in saying that the generally accepted length of time is 6 months.
6 months.
So what you can't do is you can't stop them from doing their job. So if they're even, for example, an accountancy and finance recruiter, you can't stop them from being an accountancy and finance recruiter.
Yeah.
What you can do is stop them from directly dealing with what was your client base. And obviously you can also stop them from taking away your confidential information, which sits outside the restrictive covenants. So I would have, we have 2 separate sections in our contract. One's a confidentiality bit, one's a restrictive covenants, because again, you don't want them to be taking information with them away from the business. People know what they know. I had clients that I dealt with before we set Simpson Judge up that I dealt with in 3 or 4 or 3 businesses before that. But still, I still can't go away and do business with them straight away if the contract says I can't. So I would get your contracts reviewed is the first thing I would do, and I would go to a proper employment lawyer specialist in that field and get those done, which we did. I mean, the original contracts we had, I think we've changed twice now, because also don't just think that because it's there, it's right, because the case law changes all the time.
No, that's really, really solid advice, and actually quite simple to enforce as well. It's not a massive headache for anybody, I don't think. That's good advice. Thank you.
And the other thing is, when people leave, at the point that they do leave, make sure you remind them of what those are, and make sure that the exit letter has that on, which fortunately we've got a HR manager here now who does all of that for them. But if they're not clear on what their covenants are, it's very difficult. It's very easy for them to breach them without even realising they're breaching.
And actually potentially then impact their new job unintentionally, like you say. So yeah, I think that's another.
Be honest with your new employer as well. If you're going from one recruiter to another recruiter, the best thing you can do, and we always ask this, is say, can we have a look at your contract?
Yeah.
And there's a big range. I mean, look, there's somebody else that you placed with us who came in and literally didn't have any restricted covenants in their contract. And we said, is this definitely your contract?
Yeah. I know who you're talking about.
I mean, some of the other ones are ridiculously unenforceable because they're effectively trying to stop you from doing your job.
You can't stop somebody earning money. I agree with you. So are you ready to move on to the advice for those potentially that are looking at moving on or setting up?
So we'll come on to the restricted covenant bit. If you're thinking about setting a recruitment business up, the real thing you need to think of is what is that recruitment business going to be and what's it going to look like? And actually, in the long term, am I going to be better working for myself, or do I need to actually move to a recruitment business that's going to look after me better, reward me better, and sort of, if you go to a business where they're going to reward you well, they're going to support you, they're going to do things like, help out with things like data, IT, further development. So, our staff every single one of them goes on a training course every year at that point. So is that going to be a better option for you to do that? And then, things like EMI schemes and share schemes and profit shares and stuff like that. Am I going to be better off moving to a business that's going to give me that? Or am I going to be better setting up on my own? Because, as I alluded to before, it's tough, right? And it's not just the right in the business that's tough. Doing fees, you'll do fees.
Yeah, of course you will.
Credit control's hard work. Companies might go bust on you and you might have to bury that. If you're going to do a temp business, then you're going to have to go down the route of getting a factoring, someone to do your factoring, someone to do your time sheeting and all that type of stuff. It's genuinely really hard. And at the end of it, you don't necessarily come out with any more from an earnings perspective than you might do. If you want to go and build something and build it into a bigger recruitment business, and you're confident you can do that, then great. And on the flip side, if you want a lifestyle business, then that's fine. If you genuinely want to go and you want to work from home, or you want that ultimate flexibility, then then that's absolutely fine. But if you think you're going to walk out and probably bill what you're billing currently in your first year, the likelihood is you're not. And it takes a long time to build that up, doesn't it? I mean, look,
it does. I've been doing it. I've been doing it a very long time. I get a lot of people who we do talk about this potential route, you see, and the first thing I'll say to them is just assume you're not going to earn any money for at least 6 months, because even if you can bill quickly, like you say, you've then got rebates. You've got to consider the rebate. Your candidate could fall out within that rebate, and then you've got no income again. And it's the cost, even if you just do it on a real shoestring, the cost of your LinkedIn license, running your phone,
those are a fortune when you're on your own. Yeah,
it seems, and actually you've got to still have all these things in place. So I think it's, I wanted to focus on the restricted covenants, but I'm really pleased that you've talked about it in a very open and pragmatic way, because I think
then when you do want to build, and I can remember having this conversation with you when you took Shannon on, when you do want to build, that bit where you go, well, actually, I've got to sacrifice anything I can draw to pay that person. To get your head around that to start with, until you get up to a decent size, is difficult.
You have to be altruistic, but at the same time, you have to still be really dogmatic about earning money. You have a lot.
And you're going to have to cover them for the first 3-4 months. That's the reality. When you start taking staff on, you're going to have to cover them. Certainly, you probably don't get any money back on anyone you hire for the first 9 months in terms of being cash positive on them. So it is difficult, and I think people underestimate it. And a lot of the time, you could actually be better off if the business that you go to is rewarding you properly. So in other words, just because you're annoyed with where you are doesn't mean that there's not a better solution to the problem than setting up on your own. If you are naturally very entrepreneurial and you want to do that and you want to spin all those plates, then great, but there's a lot more to it than just billing.
I totally agree with you. I actually think it's a really small part of the job, and I often say that. And I think there's the debate of the entrepreneur versus intrapreneur, and that's why I like working with owner managed businesses like yours, because I believe that you can be an intrapreneur. You can run your own business within a business, and then you've got that economy of scale, especially when it comes to shares and potential exit.
That's our big challenge at the moment. My biggest challenge is what we need is the managers have stepped up. We've got a really strong management team now, and Rob and I can't go anywhere or can't exit the business if we decided we wanted to exit the business until they're strong enough to run it. And that's the opportunity they have within us. But I completely understand that there'll be a lot of people that are sat in businesses that are getting sold the dream and aren't necessarily getting anywhere because the business doesn't. So that's one bit. From a covenants perspective, the big thing is understand your covenants and particularly whether you're moving or not. If you're moving to another agency or another recruitment company, get the directors to look at them. If they don't understand, possibly get them to review those with a solicitor so they understand exactly what is enforceable and what isn't. If you're setting up on your own, it might be worth getting a solicitor to look at those contracts. And understand what you can and what you can't do, because you want to be very clear on it.
Definitely.
One big bit of advice I would give someone is, if the company that you previously work for, if they start asking you for certain pieces of information because they might think that you're materially breaching your contract, don't ignore it. That's the biggest advice I can do, because as an employer, if they're saying to you, look, we just want you to confirm that you've not taken any of our confidential information, you're not taking things with, like little things like you might have a list of clients on a spreadsheet somewhere. Strictly speaking, that is the confidential information of that business. It is. Take that away and do something with it. You're in breach of your contract, and it's very. I understand that might seem like it's not a big deal, but it is. And I've worked in businesses previously where there was one guy that took a list of all their contractors and emailed it to all their competition because he'd fallen out with the business.
Oh God!
The company's got to protect itself.
Absolutely,
that's okay. And that's very extreme. The problem you have if you ignore the legal letters is that it will get worse and worse and worse. And if you're not careful, you'll get into a position where you'll then say, well, actually, because you're ignoring us and we're having to go through more legal cost on this, we're going to pass that legal cost on to you if we ever come to a settlement. So don't ignore it. I mean, the main thing is don't take confidential information, and particularly if you're going to download it from a system or something like that, if that's your idea. Fine.
No, you're gonna get found out. I mean, I have to say that's where I know how ethical somebody really is, and it's the sort of test of them and my potential client or whoever that might be, incubation company, is that just you've got to respect it. It is there if it's a legitimate part of your contracts of employment, which you will only know if you get it checked out. I always advise people to get these things checked out. You've got to do the right thing. So, and I think those that say, "Oh, I'll just get somebody else to call my clients for me," I'm like, that happens all the time.
It's a difficult one, and
it's messy.
Especially it's especially relevant if you build with them. So if you've either had jobs on that were on that CRM system with that client, or you've actively built with them, then you're completely within your right to say, well, actually, that is now our client, not your client.
Yeah.
Even if you've come from, I had clients, I've got clients that I dealt with now that I dealt with 17, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
But I was open with them when we first set Simpson Judge up. They were ringing me saying, "Can you deal with them?" And I had to say to them, "Like, really, I can't. The reason I can't is because, one, I know that the previous business will be watching, and two, it's a very small world, so the likelihood is that they will find out. And that's where I did wrong. We ignored it all, so we just went, "Oh, it'll go away." We got some really bad advice actually from a solicitor we spoke to, who said, "I'll just ignore it. Most of these things go away." And we were like, "Well, hang on, I don't think that's going to be the case." And we ignored it and ignored it and ignored it, and it ended up where they actually filed the paperwork. We went to a solicitor, and the solicitor had to work on it all weekend. And very quickly, within 3 or 4 days, we had a £5,000 bill for the work he was going to do on it. Fortunately, he was very, very good, and he made it go away before we ended up in court. But yeah, it was the day before my 30th birthday. Was the court date. I'll never forget it.
You'll never get to forget that.
And they filed in London as well, so I was going to have to go all the way down to London to go to the Old Bailey in London because they were trying to get an injunction against me because I'd ignored everything they did. And looking back at it now, I don't really blame them. I think it was probably the right thing to do.
It is the right thing to, and if I think about how this topic has evolved for me as a Rex Rec, I mean, I've been doing Rex Rec for 20 odd years. It used to be really dismissed, and it used to be really disregarded and almost laughed at. And it has totally transformed. And I think that's because businesses have taken proper legal advice and haven't just shoved it in as a clause within their employment contracts. And it is, like you say, if it's fair and reasonable, it should protect businesses. And I always maintain that you've got to do the right thing. And if you are thinking of setting up on your own, then you are naturally going to be somebody who's a business developer anyway. So it should be fair to say, for the 6 months, you respect the relationship that you had, but for the grace of God, because you would want that with your employees as well.
And to be fair as well, the last thing you want in your first 6 months in business, and this went on for a fair amount of time. So if you think this started in May of that year, and by the middle to the end of June, it was still just about getting resolved. So there was like a solid 6 weeks there.
You don't want
where
that.
We were, you're not sleeping at night because you're panicking about it.
Of course.
Process before, you're starting to get high court dates. You're running big legal bills up very quickly, and then you end up. Normally, what happens when it gets that far down the line is we ended up settling for a percentage of their legal bill because, quite rightly, because I'd ignored them, they'd run quite a big legal bill up. And it was just naivety from our perspective. But
I was going to use that word actually, and I think that's where I don't think people need to be naive anymore. I think they can seek advice, and that's why I'm really pleased that we're talking about this topic. And I'm keen to.
The established business will have deeper pockets than you in your first 6 months.
Very keen to enforce that point as well. I think just to sort of finalise this part of the conversation, you are going to need all your focus and all your energy on building your business. You don't want the distraction, and that's like a really small part of how you would feel, like you said, the anxiety and stress. So do the right thing. So thank you I think that's been a really useful part of this interview. But before we finish, I want to talk about gamification, because this is a part of your business that's really transformed and played into this sort of culture of your growth over the last few years. Can you first of all explain to us how that can work in a recruitment context?
Okay, so I mean, the background to this was our L&D guy thought it would be a good idea for the business because we run it's not for everyone. I'll caveat it with that. It's not for everyone, but in a business where you are particularly trainees, if you've got a business where every single one of your recruiters is established, they're 5 years in and they're billing very consistently, then I would think you're probably going to get quite a lot of pushback to putting this in. In a business where you've got people that are new, that you're trying to drive the right behaviours in terms of what actually drives revenue. Look, everyone in recruitment wants to make money, and if you can show them how to make money in terms of the activities that do that, and then incentivize them and make them competitive against each other. That's brilliant. But so the gamification, we use a system called Sales Screen. There's a few of them, and it sort of depends on which CRM you want or which CRM you've got. So there's one called One Up Sales we looked at that wouldn't link with our CRM. There's one called EP195, which I think has just been bought by Bullhorn and now only links with Bullhorn.
Okay.
They're all pretty similar. I would say actually Sales Screen has got a few bits on it that the others haven't, which is great. And it was only because we use Chameleon. It was only because Chameleon wouldn't link with One Up that we used it.
Right.
So we sort of stumbled across it, and it was our finance controller that did all the research into it.
Great.
What it does is three different things. So it has a dashboard system. So it's very, very easy to understand what your KPIs are. And when I talk about KPIs, that's anything from phone call numbers, which, to be honest, we're not massive on. Initially, with trainees, we are.
Yeah,
once you're up and billing, they become less relevant. Interview numbers, it will even work out for you interview ratios.
Right.
So it's a really good quality measure in terms of how many CVs you're sending for every interview, how many interviews is it before you, how many first go to second, how many interviews to placement. So you can measure that really well. But what it also will do is it will run competitions off the back of that. So you can run either team competitions, you can run personal competitions, you can run competition for people at different levels. So we'll, for example, put our rookie intakes all in together and go, right, you can do that competition. And what you do is you win rewards for it. So on our system, they win what are called coins, and those coins can then be converted into rewards, which are anything from early finish, day off, spa days, pizza for the team, all those types of things. You can pretty much have anything on it, and there's a bit on it where they can request what they want. So if it's something that they want that's not on the reward shop, we'll add it, and we'll just work out how much it costs and how many points that then equates to. So you literally have all the time. We have 2 screens in each office, and those screens have rolling around them all the time slides that have got things like revenue this week, how many interviews we've booked this week, but it will also have competitions that are running and where people are up to with that.
So like a leaderboard.
It is like a leaderboard, and we do them, like I say, we do them on people at different levels, but it also works really well because we've got 2 offices. It keeps everyone up to speed with what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Actually, like its own Facebook feed on it as well, which shows you when interviews are getting booked. All that you can set it up however you want, and then even down to instead of the old ring the bell when somebody does a deal, which I'll be honest, I was never a massive fan of. You get it pops up on the screen in both offices, and you can set up your own celebration video from YouTube on it and things like that. So it's quite a lot of fun. But if you've got rookies that came in the same intake, or you've got people at the same level, and they're tracking the leaderboards all the time, I genuinely think we had 2 rookies last year that were within, at one point, were within 300 quid of each other in terms of their billings for the year. And I think with both of them pushing for extra deals towards the end of the year, they probably ended up billing 10 to 15 grand on top of what they would have done because they were pushing so hard.
We are naturally competitive people, both with ourselves and our peer group. So I think,
if you're not, then it might not be for you. You know?
Yeah, I agree.
Particularly as a rookie coming into recruitment, and they love it, and there is that direct competition between each other that they like. So we found it great, and we had a I think it was our 6-month review or a 4-month review or something with Sales Screen the other week, and it's we're about 35% up.
Right.
You can't hear it at the moment, but it's on the background and it's popping up on my thing.
Right. Is it? As if it knew. As if it knew. I mean, I think I like the fact that you were very pragmatic and honest about the fact that for some people it wouldn't work. Because I'm thinking if I, where I am now, because I've been doing recruitment forever, but if I think about some of my clients, boutique businesses where they've got people with 5, 10, 20 years experience, they're not going to need that level of input on what your outputs need to be, what your ratios need to be, because we just know what we need to do to create the revenue.
I think you need the collateral headcount for it to work as well.
I
if you're a
agree.
10-person company, it's not going to work for you. If you're 25, 30, it is, but
I agree.
It's also great because you can put announcements on the screen. So we have things like quarterly achievers clubs. So when someone's done the placements to go on the quarterly achievers club, the announcement goes up on the screen that they booked their place. And I think it genuinely helps everyone celebrate. We've got a really nice culture where, as well as being competitive, Everyone genuinely wants everybody else to do
Yeah,
well, and that's hard.
definitely.
It's hard to get that.
I know it is, but
points didn't offer.
You do, no, but you do, and I mean, anyone that's not already following Simpson Judge, I don't know if you have got an in-house marketeer, but you're very good at sharing success, but in a really, it seems a really genuine. I mean, obviously, I know you guys, but let's say I didn't. It seems really authentic because you celebrate promotions, you celebrate success, and it's always across all social channels. That's what I like about you guys. You do a lot of it on Insta as well. And I think it seems really to play very well in terms of your culture of creating that high performing culture. And I guess that your caveats are that it isn't going to be for everybody, but I think for those listening who are in that period of growth where you go from that the painful period of 10 to 30, which a lot of our listeners are, this could
and a lot don't get to 30,
and they don't. You go constantly from 10 to 15 and then back down again. This could potentially be a really useful tool to create those behaviors, but you're doing it sounds like in a really positive, proactive way, as opposed to a punitive or embarrassing people, where it's actually a way for them to see that they can actually, it's peer to peer. You're not trying to compare Peter to Paul. So I think that's, and
you can also for yourself, you can for the individual recruiters, it makes it much easier for them to self-manage. So a lot of CRM systems, they have a reporting tool, but only the managers can access it.
Yeah.
Or that it's not very good. Like on Chameleon, the actual reporting part of Chameleon itself isn't very good. So the fact that it's right in front of you and you can build targets into it, and they know where they're at on target on everything.
Yeah.
And it records the placements in there and everything else. So constantly where you're up to. Now, if you're a recruiter and you're underperforming and you look at that and you don't think, I need to pull my socks up here, or, I need to ask some advice on
I was just about to say that. That's the bit, definitely, pastorally, I need help.
And that's your own thing. And that's where we don't use it we try not to use it as a bollocking tool. We try to use it as a, look, what's happening here? Your interview to placement's really high. And we can also use it to analyse whether we've got people on the right market. So literally yesterday, we've moved someone from one market to another market. And the reason is that we're looking at her activity on sales screen and going, she is working incredibly hard, doing all the right things.
Right.
And it's just not kicking the interviews and the placements out of it. And even down to the point where, you're sort of listening a little bit to what people's calls are like. The calls were great. Everything was doing really well. But she wasn't getting the results out of that, winning all the competitions. And we said, we think we've got you on the wrong market. We think we've got you in the wrong sector. And we've moved her over to another market. And within 2 days, we're 2 days into that now. And already you can see that there's a spring in a step, because there's nothing more demoralizing than working really, really hard and getting nowhere with it. It's like, and you could see that a little bit. And as much as the person I'm talking about didn't want to admit that, gets to you after a while.
I know, but I love that you've done that. And again, that really resonates, because if you've got somebody who's clearly the right cultural fit, has got right behaviours, wants to do a brilliant job, but maybe just isn't feeling it. And I think this is the best job in the world, and it can be, in theory, the easiest job in the world, but made more complicated if you're not passionate and maybe about your sector. So again, an amazing tip for those listening. I mean, I knew you'd be an amazing guest, Ben, but you've been absolutely fantastic. Rob would never have come on, would he? He would never have said yes to this.
Rob, I told Rob I was coming on, but I think it was Monday, and he was like, don't say anything stupid. What am I going to say that's stupid? It's like, it's all right. Lisa's told me what we're going to talk about.
I was going to say.
Don't say anything stupid.
Of course you're not going to say. I mean, look, if you did, it's a podcast. It's not, it's not censored by anybody. We can even swear in it if we wanted to. You have been absolutely fantastic, and I really do need to come over to Preston to see the new office, and I'm going to message you after this. This will go live probably towards the back end of the year. So bearing that in mind, and we obviously like to make this as evergreen as possible, as we think about, or you're already listening in 2024, what do you think will happen in the recruitment sector from an overview point of view next year, 2024?
So I actually think the recruitment sector, and this will sound random, the recruitment sector is going backwards rather than forwards in terms of the way they're doing things. And I don't mean that in terms of, I think the markets are starting to squeeze a little bit, and certainly from advisors we've been speaking to. The market's by no means bad. It's not as good as it was last year. And it's squeezing a little bit. And I think what that's naturally starting to do, I think particularly tech is squeezing. The bit we do in tech isn't, because we're very systems focused. But I And I think that what that's making people do is almost go back to a little bit more old-fashioned recruitment in terms of you've got to do your business development right. You've got to lead track right. I think the 180 model is starting to fizzle out a little bit because there's just not tons of business there where you can have one person doing the client side and feeding 180 into it. So that is going slightly back to the way it was, which, I mean, for us, I've never really liked the 180 model. It's never been something that, and certainly for our markets, I don't think it's something that ever works because we tend to do spot business. We don't tend to take on 20 jobs that are the same at one time, or 20 one company.
Yeah.
So I think that's gonna change a little bit. There's a lot of tech coming into it, which is really exciting. So obviously we've just talked about things like gamification, which we never really had. I mean, I can remember being in recruitment companies where the only competition you had like that was they print off your call times for the day before, and stick it on a corkboard and go, right, you've not done 2 hours. So I think there's better ways to do that, but there's also a lot coming in from a tech perspective from, LinkedIn Recruiter. There's data sources. There's things like that. I mean, we historically didn't have LinkedIn Recruiter for a long time, and we moved on to it about 12 months ago. And haven't really looked back since we did. It's expensive. It's very, very expensive, but I think
it's worth the investment. I think we shall see. I think that everything that you've said there is absolutely right. And let's face it, in fashion, we have retro, and I think that's possibly where recruitment is right now. We're recruitment retro, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Be interested to see what AI brings as well, won't it?
Wow.
Be interested to see what AI brings.
I can't wait to see what my robot looks like. It's been an absolute joy, as I knew it would, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's flown by, hasn't it? Told you it would. Thank you so much.